Welcome, everybody. Do I have to press something with this? Do I have to press the record button? So I can just get rid of this and ignore it? Okay. Hello, everybody. Am I being amplified because I sound extra loud? Am I being amplified?
Yes.
Okay. So I can whisper and you'll still hear me. So, welcome everybody to the first of 4 talks on digital boundaries for healthy living. I'd like to begin with a couple anecdotes. The first anecdote is about myself. This is something that happened to me in 2022. I was asked by a client to babysit some early AI systems that were creating content for their company. And this was my first introduction to AI. This is before there was widespread adoption and familiarity with artificial intelligence. So I was just blown away. And the system we were using, it used the early version of ChatGPT. And one night after my work was finished, I decided to, very counterintuitive to be amplified so much. One evening after work, I decided to chat with the bot and ask it to write a synopsis for a screenplay. That I had an idea for a dystopian screenplay where a nefarious AI takes over a poisonous mushroom system. And, but it created these characters that seemed really real to me, and I found that I could create backstories for any of the characters and spin-off stories. And sometimes something in the backstory that I would ask it to create would explain something in the first iteration that hadn't made sense, but then did make sense once it had this further context. And I could do this infinitely. I could say, hey, have these 2 characters fall in love, and then create this spin-off story when they have kids 15 years down the road. And this doesn't the wow factor in this is significantly diminished now that AI has, now we're working on like custom video from verbal prompts and like redo Casablanca but swap Humphrey Bogart for myself. Yeah, that's the sorts of things that are possible now, or almost possible. So the wow factor in my early interactions with AI is significantly diminished. But at the time, it was so amazing for me that I got addicted. I started staying up late. I would skip my prayers to go and have this, I was going to say creativity, but it's not creativity. My own creativity was going into atrophy. My prayer life started to suffer, my work started to suffer, but it was intoxicating because it felt like I wasn't just creating the characters, but I was discovering them. And they started to seem like real people to me. And so thankfully I withdrew from that, and I've never gone back and used it for that sort of thing. Here's a picture of that friend drew of me when I was in the depths of my addiction. This is me as a cyborg. I don't have a beard, but a friend drew this picture of me being a cyborg. So that was really my interest in digital boundaries grew out of that experience. And the other anecdote I wanted to share comes from I don't know why it keeps changing without my volition. Okay, there's a pause button. There we go. So the next anecdote comes from Afghanistan, when coalition forces were working to liberate the countryside in eastern Afghanistan. And the coalition forces worked with community leaders to identify areas of humanitarian need where they could help. And in one village in the eastern part of the country, coalition forces talked to the men of the village council, and they asked, how can we help your village and your community? And the men of the village council said that one very practical way that they could, one very practical thing that they could do is to build a well, because as it was, the women of the village had to travel 4 or 5 hours in the hot sun to a river and carry water back. And so this, it made great rejoicing in the community. A well was built that freed the women from this chore of having to go to the river in the hot sun. But the rejoicing was short-lived because the well kept malfunctioning. It would be fixed and it would malfunction. It would be fixed and then it would malfunction. And it was being sabotaged by an invisible culprit, and nobody could figure out why. And after extensive surveillance, eventually the culprit was discovered. It was the women of the village who were sabotaging their own well. And from a Westerner's perspective, that seems strange and bizarre. But for these women, the daily trips to the river was a time where it was the only time that they had to visit with each other, to escape from the boredom of their compounds, to engage in a matchmaking conversation with each other, to talk, to share news. And I'm sharing this story because it illustrates something that it recurs again and again in the history of technology, which is that a technology that makes life easier for one segment of the population will often place a corresponding burden on another part of the population. So this well made life better for the men who could redeploy the saved time of their wives. They could have their wives do other things in the times that was saved and so forth. Didn't have to wait for water, so forth. But it made life more difficult for the women, or at least more difficult in certain areas for them. And the same thing is true of our digital interfaces. Our digital interfaces make life easier. Our digital interfaces make life easier for a certain segment of the population, namely adults. Now, of course, the digital interfaces, whether phones, tablets, computers, so forth, they make life harder for us in some ways. But it can't be denied that in many ways, it does make life easier for us. We no longer have to memorize phone numbers. We don't have to sort through paper records. We don't have to learn to read maps. But although our digital interfaces are making life easier for one part of the population, namely adults, it's placing a corresponding burden on another part of the population, namely children. And the reason that it places a burden on children is because it leads to an increase in anxiety. Here, I'm going to play you a video clip from Jonathan Haidt, a social psychologist from New York University, followed by a clip from addiction specialist Dr. Anna Lemke. Okay, these are the bullet points that I just shared. Now, where is Jonathan Hyatt? Here he is.
There has been a gigantic increase in depression and anxiety for American teenagers, which began right around between 2011 and 2013. The number of teenage girls out of 100,000 in this country who are admitted to a hospital every year because they cut themselves or otherwise harm themselves. That number was pretty stable until around 2010, 2011, and then it begins going way up. It's up 62% for older teen girls. It's up 189% for the preteen girls. That's nearly triple. Even more horrifying, we see the same pattern in suicides. The older teen girls, 15 to 19 years old, they're up 70% compared to the first decade of the century. The preteen girls, who have very low rates to begin with, they are up 151%. And that pattern points to social media. Gen Z, kids born after 1996 or so, those kids are the first generation in history that got on social media in middle school. How do they spend their time? They come home from school and they're on their devices. A whole generation is more anxious, more fragile, more depressed. They're much less comfortable taking risks. The rates at which they get driver's licenses have been dropping. The number who have ever gone out on a date or had any kind of romantic interaction is dropping rapidly. This is a real change in generation. And remember, for every one of these, for every hospital admission, there's a family that is traumatized and horrified. My God, what is happening to our kids?
Look at my phone and I see somebody tag me on a photo. What happens? I get a little burst of dopamine in the reward pathway in my brain. That's where pleasure comes from, right? Well, that's where I experience like that little zing, like, ooh, cool. And it feels really good. After that's happened, 10, 20, 50, 100 times, it's not as exciting as it was the first time. That's the brain changing in response to that pleasurable experience. Things that are pleasurable don't stay pleasurable with a lot of repetition. That's neuroadaptation. With heavy exposure or use of any highly dopaminergic drug, I need more and more to get the same effect. Over time, I experience less pleasure when I'm not using that drug. So you're in a dopamine deficit state. So what does that mean? That means you are more unhappy than your baseline. So the next time, or maybe the 20th time, or maybe it took me 100 times, people are different, I get my photo tag, I'm like, and that comes because not as much dopamine was released, right? Now I need something more exciting, something more potent, in order to get more dopamine release so that I register some kind of pleasure. And so I think this is really a key point, that we've got these sort of reward thresholds that get altered by consuming highly rewarding, highly pleasurable drugs. Look at my phone.
So, children who have unrestricted access to digital interfaces, and even children who have restricted access, are having their anxiety rise as a result. And there are many other speakers, writers, and researchers who have done work on how the rise of anxiety in our youth corresponds with the increase of digital interfaces. And why is there this rise in anxiety? Much of the research that you can read about in books like these and others, much of the research is fairly predictable. It shows that when we use social media, it's almost impossible not to get sucked into comparing ourselves to others or to measuring ourselves against unrealistic standards of attractiveness. The research also suggests that digital interfaces contribute to anxiety because our digital distractions replace time that would otherwise be spent in activities that mitigate anxiety, such as time with others or quiet contemplative activities by oneself. Still, another reason that digital interfaces contribute to rising anxiety is that they lead, like we heard from Dr. Anna Lemke, they lead to sudden spikes in dopamine, which our system responds to by downregulating dopamine production, thus requiring more stimulus just to feel normal. And if you have to go on your phone and get messages and look at social media just to feel normal, that is a sign that this type of neuroadaptation is occurring with you. And these are all important aspects that need to be understood and talked about, especially in families. But my area of interest is in a side of this which is less understood, and that is the impact that digital interfaces have on the attention systems, both of children and adults. And appreciating the threat to attention is key to understanding the types of boundaries that will be necessary and effective. And again, I'll say that again because this is crucial. Appreciating the threat to attention is key to understanding the types of boundaries that will be necessary and effective. Here's what we know about attention. Our attention can be weak or strong. When it's weak, we get distracted easily and find it hard to focus. A weak attention leads to things like low impulse control and anxiety. Why anxiety? Well, a person with well-ordered attention can redeploy the attention away from negative cognitions. A person with a well-ordered attention can nip negative thoughts in the bud before they mature into full-fledged anxiety and chaos. And this is crucially important since a chaotic and undisciplined mind leads to a chaotic and undisciplined life. But attention is not just how we weed out what's negative. Yes, if we have a well-developed attention, we can exercise censorship over thoughts that we'd rather not entertain. We can exercise censorship over thoughts that aren't healthy for us. But it's more than just weeding out the negative. Through the gift of our attention, we preserve the things we love. If there's something you care deeply about, whether it's a type of music, a hobby, or a spouse, you will need attention to protect that. Ultimately, our attention determines the type of man or woman we eventually become. And that's because the things we attend to become part of who we are over time. So this is a quote that I think I may have shared this before, but this is about the importance of attention. Moment to moment, the flows of thoughts and feelings, sensations and desires, and conscious and unconscious processes sculpt your nervous system like water gradually carving furrows and eventually gullies on a hillside. Your brain is continually changing its structure. The only question is it for better or worse? In particular, because of what's called experience-dependent neuroplasticity, whatever you hold in your attention has a special power to change your brain. Attention is like a combination spotlight and vacuum cleaner. It illuminates what it rests upon and then sucks it into your brain and into yourself. If our attention is well developed and rightly ordered, then we can choose to attend to those things we want to be part of us and that are consistent with our goals and spiritual values. In his 2013 book, Focus, The Hidden Driver of Excellence, Daniel Goleman shared research showing that a child's ability to focus, that is to control attention, is even more predictive of the child's future success in life than their IQ or the social economic sector of the child's upbringing. And that should come as no surprise, because being able to focus our attention at will and to weed out distracting stimuli, whether that stimuli is arising externally or internally, is a key to remaining focused on our goals, and it enables us to remain present in whatever we are doing. And the type of mental self-control that comes from a well-developed attention is necessary for success in relationships, at school, and at work, and for our spiritual life. And this is disruptive to our educational models because it suggests that the content going into the student's mind is actually less important than the mind's ability to focus attention. And this ability to have a well-ordered and disciplined attention goes by many terms, including vigilance, mental self-control, mindfulness, watchfulness. These are some terms that appear in the spiritual literature. And it's all referencing more or less the same thing, the attention systems in the brain. But despite how important attention is, most of us don't actually understand it. We understand anxiety pretty well, but not attention. And consequently, we don't understand the boundaries we need for protecting our attention. And partly this is because of multiple myths and misunderstandings. And in the book that Joshua and I wrote, in the last section, we go over a number of myths and misunderstandings about attention. But one of the myths that I'd like to share with you now, because it's crucial to some of the boundaries that we'll be exploring, is about multitasking. So many people think, and maybe they don't realize they think this, but it seems intuitive that multitasking is a skill that you develop through practice. You've probably heard people say things like, I'm a good multitasker, or I'm the queen of multitasking. And these types of statements are based on the misconception that multitasking is a skill, perhaps something you get better with when you practice. And what is so interesting is there was a 2009 study from researchers at Stanford, and this has been reinforced by a string of later studies. And they found that those who multitask frequently and who believed that it boosted their performance were actually not as good at multitasking than those who multitasked only lightly or not at all. And the study suggested that the more you multitask, the worse you become at it. And of course, this is, like I said, this is counterintuitive, because most of the time we get better at the things we practice. If I'm learning a foreign language or learning to play a new instrument, the more I practice it, the better I'll get. But with multitasking, it flips this, and you get worse at it the more you practice it. And paradoxically, the people who thought they were the best at multitasking were actually the worst when the researchers at Stanford had them do a test to see how effective they were at processing information coming from multiple streams at the same time. But there was a darker side to this study. The study, as well as, again, more recent research as well, found that multitasking makes a person, and I think this is also key to why the more you multitask, the worse you get at it. Multitasking makes a person more susceptible to interference from irrelevant environmental stimuli and from irrelevant representations in memory. This is quoting from the Stanford study. But why is this? Well, remember what I shared earlier, that a strong attention allows an individual to redeploy the mind away from the negative things in life to exercise censorship over the content of one's attention, over the content of one's brain. So, but multitasking undermines this. Rather than inhibiting extraneous stimuli and strengthening our capacity for single-minded focus on one thing, we do the opposite through continually shifting our attention from one thing to the next. And over time, this makes it harder to exercise censorship over over thoughts we'd rather not entertain. So again, when you have a habit of multitasking and you're letting yourself be distracted by external stimuli, including external stimuli coming from digital interfaces, then you're actually training the brain to find it harder to exercise censorship over stimuli arising internally. When we multitask, we are weakening the parts of the frontal cortex needed for censoring unwanted cognitions. Does that make sense? So I'll open it up for discussion in a second, but another study looked at children ages 1 to 3 who were playing toys while a game show was on in the background. When the TV was on, the children began to look like junior multitaskers, moving from one toy to the next, forgetting what they were doing, trying to remember where they were at, having their attention divided when an interesting snippet came on the show. And in other words, the children were wasting a lot of time through not being focused. And that's another myth, that multitasking saves time. It actually doesn't, because we end up taking longer. And so I have some information here about impulse control. Multitasking, continuous partial attention, and divided focus does more than merely destroy attention. It also erodes impulse control. Impulse control depends on rejecting interference from irrelevant stimuli, whether arising internally from one's emotions, passions, and mental representations, or arising from an external source. The same neurological systems involved in choosing to ignore electronic distractions are the same as the systems involved in choosing to ignore distractions from the flesh and the devil. What time is it? Okay, we're doing good on time here. I went over to my clock to see what time it is, and now I can't get it back to the slideshow. So we might just be stuck on this slide for the rest of it. Slideshow. Well, maybe I'll open it up for, here we go. Okay, so this leads to our first boundary. Now maybe I'll stop and open it up for some questions while I get this, get my computer back on track here. Does anybody have any, resume slideshow. Does anybody have any questions?
I have a point that might help bolster what you're saying.
Okay.
It comes from safety training that I used to have to present to school bus drivers.
Sorry, what training?
A safety training.
Safety training.
I used to present to school bus drivers.
Okay.
On multitasking.
Oh.
You've used the phrase divided focus, that's exactly what it is. There is no such thing as actually multitasking. You are rapidly switching your attention from one task to another. You're giving neither task your full attention, and the more you do it, the faster you switch, the less depth you get in your attention for either of those topics, which is why you get worse with time. But if you're driving distracted, let's say you're texting and driving, which nobody should be doing, but you're not driving distracted, you're driving, and then you're distracted, and then you're driving, and then you're distracted. They're not happening at the same time. And it's in that distraction, it's in that multitasking that your quality of work on both tasks just falls way off.
Yes. Could I have a technical person come up and help me with the with my computer? Yes. You're not actually multitasking. You're just switching very quickly from one thing to the next. Yes.
Multitasking, I haven't heard the word video games just yet, but I'm anticipating that they're in this mix, right? I mean, if you have like a son or daughter who's video gaming for 8 to 10 hours a day, what does that do to the attention and the ability to focus, to the sensory issues, to all the things that we're talking about here?
Yeah, well, yeah, Dr. Leonard Sachs has some interesting research on that, which I'll share for you. Is that what you want? Thank you. Perfect.
I have one other question on multitasking. I've seen a lot of this research, it's fantastic. The one thing I haven't seen is a breakdown of what exactly they're calling multitasking. And some things I've wondered about are there some activities you can do simultaneously that don't sound like this, like washing the dishes while reading an audiobook, or listening to an audiobook. Like, is that multitasking? Is my attention being really, am I not doing washing the dishes or reading the audiobook very well when I'm doing those at once?
Yeah, well, we can focus our attention on one thing while we're doing something else in the background, like monks.
So that's not actually multitasking?
No.
Okay.
That's like a monk praying while he's weaving a basket. So they did a study of drivers, and they found they were shocked. They found that when you're driving, they expected there would be lots of brain activity. There were hardly any brain activity when you're driving. It was almost like a dead person. They were just like amazed. Why is there no brain activity when you're driving? Well, I don't know why, but for whatever reason, when we drive, we're just kind of on autopilot. Our attention is ready if we need to suddenly engage. But I suspect it's similar with washing dishes or folding laundry or something. You have music or audiobook in the background, and that's where your attention is. But if you had music and television and having a conversation, then that would be multitasking. Yes.
Just a little bit more on that. So there's been some interesting studies on this. That we know the term white noise. So like some people sleep with a fan because they need this background white noise. But there's like white activities too that actually aid the creative process. So most people washing the dishes, in the shower, so these kinds of activities. And there's a long, long list of artists, great artists, who, and even scientists, who the whole sort of creative process comes to fruition within them while they're doing these right activities, these mindless activities, like the praying and the making the road. All spent, that's a major part of it. And Tolstoy, for example, he was wealthy. He shoveled his own snow because that's where he would sort of spark this creative process and solve problems in his stories. Einstein, the law of relativity came to him in a dream, actually. He wasn't contemplating it at the time, it just came to him. Anyway, to say all that, it's just a fascinating thing. As a creative artist person myself, I have to create things, learning how to put oneself in the right frame of mind, and to even use some of these things as techniques to sort of spark creativity. But it's not just creativity for a painting or making something, it's creativity in problem solving. And so that being said, and then I'll shut up, I do think that it's very important to parse this out a little more carefully, not more than what you're doing, but I mean, I hear, and I agree with it, I agree with all this multitasking, all the research and what's being communicated, 100% agree with it. But I think we need to parse it out a little more subtly, some of the nuances like this. It doesn't mean that you can't be shoveling snow, which actually might aid you for making a road, in creativity in any number of areas. So I think we have to be thoughtful about how we kind of break that down.
Yes, thank you. Let me just respond to that very helpful observation before I take any more questions. Why is it that shoveling snow or doing the dishes or driving or listening to music or so forth, why is it that those things are incubation periods for creativity? Well, it's because they calm the mind. So many people find it more calming to be doing something that doesn't require a lot of attention. If I'm just sitting in a chair, have a brain scan, there'll be all sorts of brain activity, but when they do drivers, there's hardly any brain activity. Well, doing these things that we can do almost without thinking, especially if they involve the body, are calming for the mind. That's why some people find this with exercise. This is why I like to hike and like to exercise. Multitasking, on the other hand, is not calming for the mind. So if you're like wondering, is this multitasking or is this does this count as multitasking or is this in the other category? Just ask yourself, is this calming for the mind? Is this helping develop my attention, my sense of focus? Or is this scattering my attention? And for some, it'll be different for some people. Like, I can't listen to classical music. I can't listen to classical music while I write. Other people can. So there's it has to be individuated for each person and based on what types of things help their attention, what will erode their attention. Yes, Alex.
Yeah, two things. One, William Morris once put, if a chap can't compose an epic while weaving a tapestry, he better quit. He'll never amount to anything. And I think it's funny, but I think that highlights, building on what Father Patrick was saying about Tolstoy and the snow shoveling, it's different kinds of attention. These things that we can class as not multitasking. Listening to an audiobook while washing dishes. Those require completely different things of us, of our brains, of our bodies. Working on an idea for a novel while shoveling snow when you're trying to do the things that stress me out, that bring anxiety, when I'm doing too much at once, are things that require the same kind of attention. Like I'm having a text conversation with a group of friends, I'm trying to edit something for work, I'm trying to half listen to a lecture or something. It's like, I can't do all of that at once. The other thing, as a corollary to what first you and then Father Patrick were saying a few minutes ago, when Father Herman Maichak was here a few years ago, he's a higher monk. He gave a talk about the Psalms and praying the Psalms and the liturgical use of the Psalms. And he said when he comes into church and there are Psalms being chanted, he immediately takes out his prayer rope and just starts praying the Jesus prayer. And he said, now, this is surprising to some people. How can you focus on the Psalms while doing this other activity? And he said, well, for me, I know that if I am not using my hands, and it's like a fidget spinner, effectively, then my mind is going to be focusing on 100 things at once, rather than I can focus on two things at once. One thing that's using my hand and engaging my body while I'm listening, or I can try to listen, but my brain is going to go off in 100 different directions.
Yeah, that's really interesting how doing the Jesus prayer actually helped to tether his mind to
Yes.
Psalms. And just your point about the different parts of the brain, the types of multitasking that erode our attention is multiple channels requiring the dorsolateral frontal cortex. So the dorsolateral area of the frontal cortex is the part of the brain that's involved in making decisions and allocating resources. So when we're working on a moral dilemma or a cost-benefit analysis, it's the dorsolateral area of the brain. And what they found is that when you multitask with electronic distractions that actually or potentially call for a response or require you to have to make a decision or be in a state of readiness to make a decision or to process information, even if it's to decide, oh, I'm not going to reply to this or that, that uses the dorsolateral area. And when we're doing activities that do not call for decision making, such as 90% of driving, such as doing the dishes, such as shoveling snow, such as exercising, we are not using the dorsolateral area of the frontal cortex, which means that those activities can actually enhance creativity or decision making happening simultaneously with that. Does that make sense? Does that make sense? Question back there.
Yeah, I'm just kind of trying to figure that out about, say, like listening to audiobook and doing the dishes. It may not be multitasking as it's kind of laid out like Alex was saying, but as you referenced earlier, as far as anxiety is related, we fill up these spaces with other things, right? So I think it's still, of course, can be problematic in the sense that for most of the industry, you wouldn't have had the opportunity to have an audiobook or someone reading you an epic, while you shovel the snow. So I still think there's some kind of tension there that we can't just be like, oh, it's okay to fill that space with whatever thing that now we have these tools.
Yes,
I've discovered, because I was listening to a lot of audiobooks and a lot of podcasts, and then I realized that there was never any silence for my brain to even consolidate the information I was taking in. So I wasn't remembering them very well. But if I cut it out and I made sure that there was some time
personal experience in this. So I don't know how this fits. I've often wondered, because I'll tell you what causes me anxiety. Is when the deacons are cleaning these priceless vessels and chit-chatting. Over on the floor. Drives me insane. So when I clean the vessels, I'm not talking to anybody. And my mind's not on it. I am thinking about cleaning that vessel carefully. I'm holding it, wiping it out, checking it for water spots, thinking about where I'm going to set it, what I'm going to grab next. Now, I'm an anomaly.
Yeah, let's
because
do better than all these.
it's just I had a different life experience that comes from my life experience and training, but people don't like things anymore. So that is not my experience, and basically it's very difficult for me to live with the rest of you mortals. It's a real cross to bear. People don't pay attention to what they're doing. There's no conscientiousness about the physicality of what they're doing among almost no one.
Wow.
My daughter, Olivia, she's got it. There are very few. Probably, I'd be hard pressed to find 10 people in this church that have that. And it's just been interesting.
I don't think I probably don't have it.
No, you don't. No, I'm has nothing to do with being better, but I am very fascinated by how that figures into this conversation.
Yeah.
Because I've wondered about that a long time. And I don't experience that. When I'm doing something physical, I'm paying very, very careful attention to what I'm doing.
Yes. Well, I think it probably depends on what you're doing as well.
And it can be mundane.
Oh.
It can be mundane, you know. But I'm hyper in that direction.
That's interesting. Yeah, that is, you're correct that is unusual in these days and age. We're going to have one more question because I want to be able to get to some of the boundaries. Jim.
Kind of reminds me of something I heard about called quiet eye, that a lot of professionals just describes this incredible ability to focus by kind of premier athletes. So you can imagine like bases loaded, bottom line, World Series tie ball game, and you're at the plate and the crowd is screaming, the other team is booing at you, calling you names, but those premier athletes in that moment are focused so much on the ball coming to them. That a ball going 90 miles an hour, they can actually see the stitches on the ball. Or a golfer with the same quiet eye, they don't have big restrictions, but they can actually see the moment that the face of the glove hits a specific spot on the back of that ball, even though this is moving so fast. And the same thing with basketball players. So it's this incredibly powerful ability to focus on the very one thing they have to do to be successful in this world, just like this enormous level of chaos and distraction all around.
Well, yeah, I wouldn't be able to do that. That's amazing. But yeah, just to Joe's point, even though shoveling snow and listening to audiobooks or whatever is not actually multitasking because it's both activities aren't requiring decision from the same part of the brain, and particularly the dorsolateral frontal cortex. Nevertheless, a healthy brain needs time of quiet. We need time when we're driving and not listening to anything, when we're doing the dishes and we're just not having input. And what's really interesting is that times of quiet or times of seemingly monotonous activity, like weaving a basket or walking or doing the dishes, if we just kind of lean into the quiet, these activities actually act as an incubation period for higher cognition and creativity. When was it that Archimedes had his central insight? It was when he was having a bath. So, yes, we want to have times to let the brain just incubate creativity within context of quiet. We'll have lots of time for questions next week, maybe even later today. I don't know what time it is, but I wanted to just, so please stop me when it's 1:30, but I wanted to just share the first boundary as we kind of put all of this together in practice. What does that look like in terms of boundaries? And one very simple thing that you can do to protect your attention and to strengthen your focus is to make your digital interface a single channel device. And this is where, ironically, we can actually leverage our digital tools for strengthening our attention. So focus on whatever you're doing on the digital interface by making it into a single channel device. If you use social media, as I occasionally do, turn everything else off. Don't use it don't have Facebook and Instagram open while you're doing a Microsoft Word or in a Google document writing something. If you're watching TV or playing a computer game, turn off your email and text alerts. If you're listening to an audiobook, turn off notifications for everything else. In this way, you can use your device to actually strengthen your attention rather than to encourage split focus and continuous partial attention. Now, I want to burrow a little deeper into why this is important. Neuroscientists at MIT use the term switch cost to describe the loss of attention when we're pulled away from one task, even if only for a split second, to glance at the message. The redirection of attention has an effect on the brain's ability to focus that lasts 15 to 20 seconds. So I glance at the message, half a second, maybe even less than that, but the drain on my attention, even when I go back to the other activity, lasts up to 15 or 20 minutes. The worst effects of switch cost occur in the first 64 seconds after checking one's email or text message, regardless of whether it was a message of significance. To say that again, this is key. The worst effects of switch cost occur in the first 64 seconds after checking one's email or text messages, regardless of whether or not there was a message of significance. This would also include social media notifications. And the residual effect of this lasts for 15 or 20 minutes. You might not be consciously thinking about the message, but unconsciously your brain is still partially there. If you're having a conversation with someone for an hour, but they quickly glance at the message or notification twice during that hour, then you might only have the person's full attention for 20 minutes out of that whole hour because of the lingering effects of switch cost from the redirection of their attention. There is a cost in terms of attentiveness from moving your attention from one thing to the next. But it gets worse. It gets worse, my friends. The impact of digital distractions occurs even when there are not actual distractions, as long as you have the potential to be distracted. So knowing that at any time your attention could be diverted away from the movie you're watching or the conversation or the book or project you're doing, knowing that any time your attention might be diverted away from the activity that you're engaged in, stops you from being able to fully engage in that activity. And it puts a drain on your working memory. Now, I'm going to give an example from my own life. Knowing that at any moment a bell might go off to alert me for an incoming text message or notification keeps me on the edge, always ready to be interrupted. I might go for an entire hour without an actual interruption, but I am ready to be interrupted, ready for my attention to be redirected because my phone is on me. And much of this is unconscious, but the overall impact of being constantly prepared for interruption is to block me from full engagement with any one activity. I begin to exist in a state of continuous partial attention. And even after turning off all my notifications, I still find myself distracted. While trying to read or pray or work, in the back of my mind I'm thinking, I wonder if so-and-so has responded to my message. For other people, the issue isn't messages, but the pull of the news. Or maybe I'm missing something, maybe something's happened. Or the stimulation of social media. I wonder if a friend has posted something I'm missing. And so even if we go like a whole 2, 3, 4 hours of not using the digital interface, the fact that there's this conversation happening in the background that you have the potential to jump in and out of at any time, that itself puts a huge drain on the attention because of interruption potential. The readiness to be interrupted and the potential to be interrupted, even if you're not quote unquote ready, puts a drain on the attention, and including the areas of the brain needed for creativity and memory. And so there's something we can do about this, and that leads to the next boundary. But first, I'm going to read you a quote from a really cool book. It's about this. Often the redirection of attention seems minor and trivial. Is there really anything so bad with quickly answering a text message during a movie, or glancing at an incoming email while walking with a friend? In itself, no. But if these behaviors are repeated enough to become habitual, the aggregate impact will be to normalize the condition of continuous partial attention. Excuse me. Thus eroding the power of our executive networks to control what we orient toward. I'm not used to talking so much, so it's making me cough. Anyway, attention is like a muscle. You either use it or lose it. Thus, when continuous partial attention becomes ingrained, it starts being difficult to deeply focus on any one thing for a long period of time. And it becomes especially difficult to focus on something complex that requires higher cognitive functions. Now, so what have I done about this? Well, I turned everything off. And this might seem really simple, but for me it's been a godsend. So I protect my attention by having all sounds and notifications turned off, even texts. If someone texts me, I won't know until it's time to go and check my texts. And that would be different each day. Sometimes it'd be like, okay, I'm not going to check my text until 3 o'clock, but maybe if there's like work notifications, work messages that I need to stay abreast of, I will maybe, okay, I'm going to, thank you. Maybe on certain days, I'll check my text every hour, whatever. You do what works for you, but I have everything turned off. And friends, apart from my ringer, and friends and family know that if there's an emergency, they can phone me because my ringer is always on. And so the key is to find what works best for you. But I had to move my texting app off of my home screen, and remove all notifications. And it takes a while to do this. The phone companies want to keep us addicted, and there's a whole different story here. We could go into how the tech companies intentionally made the digital interfaces, especially the iPhone, they intentionally made them, they did design choices that made them more addictive than they needed to be. And so, like, whenever I get a new device, the first thing I do is figure out how to turn off all the notifications. And sometimes this takes tenacity because they don't make it easy for you. Are we out of time? Oh, so thank you all for your attention. You're all welcome to ask me more questions after you're dismissed, and we'll continue this next week. Have a great afternoon, all of you. Thank you for your attention.